Powerful insights often occur when you least expect them. On Transformative Leadership Conversations, they're at the heart of every episode. Hi, I'm your host, Winnie da Silva, and together we're exploring a spectrum of leadership themes through the compelling stories and insights of seasoned leaders and prominent experts. And in each episode, you'll walk away with inspiration, strategies, and tools to enhance your leadership, build effective teams, and lead thriving organizations. This month's leadership theme is called The Confidence to Lead, and I'm wrapping up this series with my own take. After reflecting on confidence across 2 decades of coaching executives, developing critical leadership skills, and working with clients to build effective teams, I notice a pattern. When leaders begin to lose confidence, I found it's usually traced back to one of these 4 patterns: the unknown, the comparison, the undermining relationship, and the identity transition. So, in this episode, I want to unpack all 4 of these patterns by quickly describing what they look like, how they can erode our leadership confidence, and then I'll share a client story for each. Also offer a few questions to help determine if that pattern might be the one that's eroding your own leadership confidence. Finally, I'll offer a few practical ways you can rebuild your own leadership confidence. Okay, so let's get into the 4 big ways our leadership confidence can break down. First, the unknown. Confidence erodes when expectations are unclear, when we're not sure what excellence looks like, how success is measured, or what others want from us. Because when we don't know what's expected of us, we can't calibrate our decisions, our effort, or our sense of progress. We are literally in the dark, which leads us to make educated guesses, like hoping our work lands where it needs to, and embracing ourselves for the feedback that follows. So, pretty quickly, this uncertainty turns into self doubt. So, instead of thinking, am I doing this right? We begin to think, I can't do it. Even highly capable leaders lose confidence when the goalposts are invisible or constantly moving. And the longer we operate without clarity, the more we start to question our instincts, second guess our decisions, and shrink instead of stretch. When the Gallup organization conducted research on employee engagement, guess what the number one thing people said they wanted from their managers at work? I know what is expected of me. That was the number one thing they want. My belief is that most people want to do good work, but no one can do good work if they don't know what is expected of them. If we don't know what success looks like or how it's measured, we just can't be successful. We almost lose our ability to function and therefore leverage our leadership strengths at work. What comes to mind immediately are 2 people who faced this confidence drainer. One led to the person quitting their job, and the other led to that person being let go. In both cases, the unknown broke their leadership confidence. So I had a lawyer friend, and his new boss was a partner who kept handing him assignments with no real direction. So my friend would complete the work and bring it back to this partner for his review. But every single time he heard the same feedback. Not quite what I was looking for. What? Now, of course, my friend would ask, okay, what needs to change? What would make this better? But the partner's only response was this: I'm not exactly sure. Seems crazy to me, right? But this happened like over and over again. And all those late nights, the revisions, like the guesswork that he put into all of that work, and that total lack of clarity drove him to finally leave the firm. Of course, not because he couldn't do the work. It's just that it was impossible to feel confident and be successful when his boss continued to refuse to define success. I've also worked with clients who have had similar experiences. A recent client I worked with, I'll call her Karen, was serving as acting CFO for an emerging business. She was super smart and totally capable. But by the time I met her, she was completely frustrated, exhausted, and unsure of herself. Not because she couldn't do the work again, but because she was getting conflicting messages about what her role was and what good looked like. The CEO, her direct manager, gave her clear direction and positive feedback, right? So that's great. They had a really good relationship, and Karen understood his expectations and she met them. Unfortunately, above the CEO sat a board with a very different view. They didn't like her performance, but they were never direct with her or, frankly, anyone else about how she could improve. The feedback she received was vague and arbitrary. Now, layered on top of all this was politics. It turns out that the board was also unhappy with the CEO, and Karen was getting caught in the middle for sure. She didn't know who to please, what standards to meet, or which expectations really mattered, and she was eventually asked to leave. Now, you can imagine that all of this significantly impacted her confidence and her ability to do her job. Not every situation, of course, is this extreme. For instance, sometimes your boss just doesn't know what success looks like either. Now, in those moments, the executive often has to define it themselves and articulate what they believe excellence should look like, propose it to their manager, and co create clarity together. But regardless of how it shows up, operating inside the unknown is definitely stressful. It wears on even the most confident of leaders. So, if you're listening and wondering whether the unknown might be impacting your confidence, here are a few questions to help you check. Do I feel confident in my skills, but unsure what others want from me? Where am I hesitating or overthinking because expectations aren't defined? And lastly, if clarity increased tomorrow, would my confidence rise with it? Okay, let's get to the next one, the comparison. The comparison happens when you benchmark your leadership, competence, or achievements against someone else. So instead of focusing on your own unique leadership strengths, you undermine your confidence because you think you should be someone else or that someone else is better than you. As Theodore Roosevelt famously said, comparison is the thief of joy. In leadership, I'd say that comparison is the thief of confidence. Confidence doesn't always crumble suddenly, of course. Sometimes it erodes quietly. Every time we measure ourselves against someone else's success, someone else's title, or presence in the room, we stop appreciating our strengths and instead fixate on the gap between who we are and who we think we should be. So, even highly capable leaders can fall into this comparison trap and feel small when this becomes the lens through which we evaluate ourselves. Let me share a client story that really exemplifies the comparison. And in truth, this story represents a pattern I've seen with several leaders over the years, but especially with CEOs. Now, most of us have stereotypes around what a CEO should be and what they should look like: confident, charismatic, commanding a stage with ease, someone who loves public visibility, speaks effortlessly to large crowds, and radiates certainty. But not all CEOs look like that, right? Some are more reserved and they lead better through listening than broadcasting. They prefer to build trust and influence through depth rather than breadth. One of my clients, the CEO and founder of a media advertising company, was exactly that kind of leader. He was skilled at developing deep and meaningful relationships with clients and employees. He was thoughtful and had a quietly engaging spirit. Connecting one on one or in small groups was where he really shined. In these situations, he came alive, and what followed were relationships built on trust, resulting in followership at all levels and a lot of sales. But for a long time, he believed he was failing simply because he wasn't the other kind of CEO. He compared himself to leaders who loved being on stage and captured everyone's attention. He assumed he should be more like them. And that comparison, not his lack of skill or leadership, is what undermined his confidence. Through coaching, we unpacked and released the story he was carrying around in his head, which was that what a real CEO looked like, and that it looked different than him, and that confidence required performing like someone else. Once he embraced his own style, which was working, by the way, he stopped chasing a version of himself that didn't exist. And as that comparison fell away, so did the insecurity that came with it. He didn't need to become a different CEO. He just needed permission to be the one that he already was. Confidence is sometimes about letting go of who we think we should be. Now, if you're listening and wondering whether the comparison might be sneaking into your own leadership, even subtly? Here are a few questions to help you check. Who do I compare myself to the most? And what story do I tell myself when I do? Do I believe I should look, lead, or perform like someone else to be successful? Which of my strengths am I undervaluing because they don't match my own or someone else's picture of success? And if I led more like me and less like the CEO in my head, what would that look like? Okay, next, the undermining relationship. This might be the most insidious one. Now, confidence for all of us can take a huge hit when the people or environment at work intentionally or unconsciously undermine us. Put another way, when we work in a place where there is a lack of psychological safety, this can quickly impact our confidence. Microaggressions, second guessing, micromanagement, or when power dynamics are at play, these can all distort our self perception and therefore our confidence. According to research from the American Psychological Association, 80% of employees who experience high psychological safety at work believe they can reach their full potential, compared to just 62% of those with less psychologically safe environments. This is a pretty meaningful gap, right? And it tells us something I think pretty important. If people believe they can reach their full potential in psychologically safe environments, it is not a stretch to say that their confidence is also significantly higher. Psychological safety doesn't just make work more comfortable, it creates the conditions where people can feel capable, valued, and willing to try new things. In environments where safety is low, confidence often is low too. So here's my client story. Just like the others, this is a dynamic I've seen many times over the years. I worked with a leader called Lisa. I'll call her Lisa. Her relationship with her boss was pretty good at first, actually. They connected regularly, aligned on priorities, worked on successful projects together. But underneath all that, the relationship started to become disturbingly unpredictable. There was a moment when her boss, I'll call her Anna, asked Lisa to facilitate an important client meeting on her own. Lisa led the discussion confidently. She was prepared and she was organized. But then, without warning, Anna joined the call. She derailed the conversation and responded sharply to the decisions Lisa believed they were already aligned on. And unfortunately, this was not a one off event. Lisa began to notice that no matter how well she prepared or how aligned they were to start, the response she received from Anna could shift dramatically from one moment to the next. One week, her work was praised. The next week, that same decision was questioned or undermined. So Lisa's confidence didn't break all at once, but it wore down slowly under that increasing inconsistency and volatility of their relationship. Now, Lisa thought she could make it better, right? It was worth a try. She prepared pre reads before every conversation so there were no surprises. She rehearsed her questions. She walked into meetings braced for whatever kind of mood Anna was in, because Lisa never knew which version of Anna was going to show up. But in the end, Lisa ended up spending her energy managing this relationship and the resulting risks from it, rather than putting her energy into doing her job. It is extremely difficult to feel confident when you're constantly bracing for someone's unpredictable reactions or moods. So, when you're dealing with the undermining relationship, doubt becomes adaptive. You end up shrinking to stay safe, to over prepare, to avoid surprise, and you start questioning your instincts instead of trusting them like you should. Even the strongest leaders lose confidence when psychological safety is missing. Now, if you're hearing this and thinking, yep, I know what that feels like, you're not alone. Here are a few questions to help you see if this pattern may be impacting your own leadership confidence. Where am I bracing instead of contributing because I'm anticipating reactions I can't predict? Have I started doubting myself, not because of my own capabilities, but because I don't feel psychologically safe at work? And what would my leadership look like if I didn't have to manage someone else's unpredictability or emotional volatility? Okay, the last one, the identity transition. This is the most common confidence buster I see with my clients. And usually the situation is a positive one. They've been promoted, or they've taken on a new role, or they've finally achieved a career shift they've just been dreaming about. These are all really good things. And yet, these kinds of situations are also really big changes. And that's the thing, change is stressful, even when it's really good. A new role with new visibility, scope, and added responsibilities can accentuate the places that we need to learn and grow, probably quickly, right? So that we can master it and be successful. The title changes overnight, but our own eternal identity doesn't always keep up. Those new expectations and new stakeholders and new ways of working end up shining a light on where we now need to learn and grow. And confidence can start to topple, not because we're not qualified, but because we're becoming someone bigger than we've been before. As Marshall Goldsmith, best-selling author and executive coach, famously named his best-selling book, "What Got You Here Won't Get You There." I worked with a leader I'll call Catalina. Catalina had recently made a mid-career switch into an entirely new industry, and then 2 years later, moved from one role into a much bigger and challenging one. So, big changes in a short amount of time. For some context, the industry she came from originally was highly competitive and complex, where only top tier performers survived. So, Catalina was bringing a lot to this new industry and now to this new big role. She had every reason to feel confident. But suddenly she found herself in completely unfamiliar ground. In her previous world, of course, she knew the systems, the players, and the space. But in this new industry and role, she not only needed to learn the technical side of the work, but she also had to navigate the expectations of a highly matrixed organization in this new role. And that gap, that uncomfortable in between space, was difficult to navigate in ways she did not anticipate. Here's one example, really a small one. In meetings, she often knew what she wanted to say, but found herself watching and waiting for others to speak first. And when she did speak up, she didn't come across as her usual confident self. Catalina got caught up in feeling like she needed to be an expert immediately, even though that was completely unreasonable. Everyone, including her managers, knew she would learn the job quickly, but it didn't matter. Her confidence still took a hit simply because she was learning a new role, and that was just taking time. In our coaching, we focus both on the strengths she was hired for and on the areas she needed to develop quickly. As she grew more comfortable, she began applying her strengths in new and more deliberate ways, and she steadily got up to speed on the parts of the job that were new to her. Before long, Catalina started speaking up with greater conviction. She trusted her perspective again, not because someone else validated it, but because she had grown into it. The identity transition is one of the biggest opportunities for leaders. But identity doesn't shift the moment a promotion happens, right? Confidence builds as our inner self grows into our outer role. If Catalina's story resonates with you, here are a few questions to explore whether this pattern is impacting your leadership confidence. Am I in a new role that intellectually I know I'm ready for, but emotionally I'm hesitating? What old habits or patterns are undermining my confidence as I operate within a new role? What could change if I stopped trying to prove myself and instead embrace the leader I am becoming? So, those are the four patterns I see when executives lose their confidence. One, the unknown. Two, the comparison. Three, the undermining relationship. And last, number four, the identity transition. Okay, so let's get to how you can rebuild your confidence. While awareness is a powerful thing, confidence doesn't rebuild through insight alone. Learning why confidence erodes gives us understanding, but the real shift comes from what we do next. So let's talk about what confidence building or rebuilding looks like inside each of these four patterns. I'll walk you through a few practical steps as if we were kind of coaching together to help you strengthen your confidence from where you stand today. Okay, number one. If your confidence is weakened by the unknown and clarity is missing, you need to proactively shape what success looks like rather than waiting for someone else to hand it down to you. Use these prompts to rebuild your confidence in this area. First, write down your own definition of success for you in this role. Then, ask your manager if they would be open to collaborating together on what success looks like for both of you. Then, take the initiative and set up a simple and ongoing process to receive feedback early and often for continued alignment and on expectations and performance. Next, if the comparison is draining your confidence and you're judging yourself against someone else's leadership, what rebuilds confidence here is remembering and reclaiming what already makes your leadership strong, effective, and valuable. Use these prompts to rebuild your confidence in this area. Whose leadership am I measuring myself against? And is that comparison useful or disruptive? What do I do well that others consistently benefit from or rely on? When I lead authentically, what do I notice about how others respond? And lastly, identify one aspirational leadership behavior. Consider how you can intentionally build this into your daily leadership practice by applying your strengths and addressing the areas where you want to improve and grow. Okay, next, if you're navigating the undermining relationship, remember that this can take many forms: unpredictability, micromanagement, dismissiveness, passive aggression, microaggressions, even blame or sabotage. The work in this pattern is twofold: to separate your capability from their behavior and to see clearly what's yours to carry and what isn't. Rebuilding confidence means grounding yourself in reality by observing the facts as best you can, naming what is within your control, and reclaiming trust in your own judgment instead of recalibrating yourself around someone else's volatility. Use these prompts to rebuild your confidence in this area. Where am I shrinking, over accommodating, or dimming myself to stay safe rather than leading with confidence? What part of this situation is about me and my performance, and what part is about their behavior, communication, or style? Where do I have control to change, and where don't I have control to change? Document 1 week of interactions and look for patterns. Where am I strong? Where is the relationship unstable? And where do boundaries need to be reinforced? Lastly, if you're in the identity transition, stepping into a bigger role or a new environment can cause confidence to lag. A promotion, expanded scope, or industry shift may signal growth, but internally, you're still finding your footing. Identity transitions create this in between space, no longer who you were, but yet not fully who you've become. Use these prompts to rebuild your confidence in this area. What aspects of this transition are truly about skill building, and what aspects are about allowing myself to embrace the new leadership identity? Which strengths from past roles still serve me, and how can I use them as a foundation while I learn what's new? And lastly, choose one skill this role requires that you have not fully mastered and begin practicing it intentionally without letting it define your confidence or your sense of self. So, rebuilding confidence doesn't usually come quickly, unfortunately. The work includes awareness, consistent practice, and usually mindset shifts. Depending on how deeply your confidence has been shaken, the work can take time. As you work through these patterns, don't be too hard on yourself. Some days you'll feel a step ahead, and other days you'll feel like you've slipped back. Of course, this is completely normal, right? What matters is that you stay engaged with your own growth process, return to the practices that are working, and continue to try new things and work on things that are not working. Lastly, track your progress. Notice and, of course, celebrate the small movements and the small moments where you spoke up, trusted your judgment, or stayed grounded in a really difficult situation. Those small wins are the evidence that confidence is being rebuilt from the inside out. Thanks for listening to this episode of Transformative Leadership Conversations. Just a quick note that the last episode of 2025 is coming out on December 29th, where you'll hear something a little bit different. If you remember back in October during my 20-year anniversary series, during the episode of the Lie Almost All Leaders Believe episode, I committed to spending 45 minutes each week in pure strategic thinking, free from technology and distraction. Well, you're going to get a behind the scenes look at my own leadership experiment. Each week, I recorded a short reflection after my session, and in this next episode, you'll hear all 4 installments. What unfolded surprised me, reshaped my thinking about productivity and tiny experiments, and reminded me how small commitments can create really big momentum. It is the perfect episode to end the year and to think about what tiny experiments you want to try out in 2026. If you're ready to take your leadership to the next level or empower your teams for success, I am here to help. Reach out to me directly at winnie@winifred.org or check out my website at www.winniedasilva.com to learn more about my work in coaching executives, developing critical leadership skills, and working with clients to build effective teams. You can also find me on Substack, LinkedIn, and YouTube. I'd love to hear reflections or suggestions for future topics. Because you are always welcome to take a seat at the table where every conversation has the potential for transformative change.